But even better is to load all that in your tracking system. And as your scanning sets to the load, it's doing the math behind the scenes. Most major tracking systems have that capability. You have to talk to your manufacturer or your representative about it.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, Sterile Processing Universe. My name is Hank Balch. You're listening to Beyond Clean Podcast. And on today's episode, we're talking to Dave Jagrosse about the topic of sterilizer loading. We're going to go into some of the perspectives around that, maybe some misconceptions when it comes to how best to load. Does the load need to look good? Yeah, I guess it needs to look good. Shouldn't look too messy, but it needs to work well. It needs to be loaded efficiently and effectively in the way that then the sterilant, if it's steam or low temp, can correctly and adequately penetrate all of those devices on that load. And so we're going to pick Dave Jagrosse's brain here on what that actually means, what it entails, how you can get your loads right, every load, every time. So hang with us. We'll be right back in studio with Dave Jagrosse.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, so we're in studio now with Dave Jagrosse from David Jagrosse Consulting. Dave, welcome back to the show with us.
Thank you, Hank. I'm coming to you from Canada today up at the Camder event, and I ran into some Beyond Clean folks, Canada, so It was really great. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of, man. I talked to folks, they're like, this morning I saw Dave's going to Florida, and then he's going to New York, and then he's going to California. So, you're international this time. That's
yes,
right.
Yes.
That's great. Well, we got you in studio. You're good on a lot of topics. Obviously, you're out there consulting about all kinds of things in sterile processing. But I knew if we're having something that's related to sterilization in particular, that I wanted to get you back here with us. And
thank you. To
that extent, we're talking today on this episode on sterilizer loading and, the basics, the nuances, did you think about this? You've been doing it this way. And, really on the heels of last season where we talked about the little things. I know we talked about the door gasket. I think on your episode was the little things that make a big difference. Well, in this season, obviously there's some big things, and I would put the entire loading conversation in the category of it's a pretty big deal. You're doing it every single day. Somebody's loading that sterilizer, and we got to get it right. So maybe let's just kind of start with the basic concept. What are we doing when we're loading this autoclave?
I mean, even if it's a small chamber, it's a big deal, right? Mm-hmm, so, no, you're absolutely right. And, this is an audio event that we're on right now, but visually, if you could see me, I'm talking with my hands, right? I always like to describe things as I use what I call the waterfall analogy. So you think about steam entering the chamber, right, of the autoclave. When the steam is entering that chamber and contacting our devices, it's collapsing into liquid water. We call that condensate. So if you think about that, even the wall of the chamber itself, the top wall of the chamber, is essentially dripping water down, right? Condensate onto that top shelf. The top shelf and the chamber ceiling is dripping down onto shelf 2. And then finally, all 3 shelves or areas are dripping down to the bottom. So this is why we put things on angle, like if we had a basin or a prep cup, because when this condensate collects into a pool, it's very hard to evaporate it during the dry phase. This is why we put liners in our trays, because if we spread that water or condensate over a larger surface area, we're able to evaporate it quicker. So I always tell people, think of that. You know, Amy speaks about, and you want clean hands, but they talk about a hand space in between your packages as a good guide, right? If you thinking of that waterfall analogy, if, you know, I won't name names on the show, Hank. I don't want people to come after you, but there's always that very difficult loaner tray to dry. Why would I put that on the bottom shelf knowing the water flow analogy, right? Or waterfall analogy. Even the second shelf, try to get it on that top shelf so that all that additional condensate isn't saturating your packages. This is why we don't place containers over wrapped goods, because that entire container surface is dripping condensate down and it oversaturates the blue wrap. It'll never get dry because there's just so much liquid water. And Hank, I will purposely try to come up for air. Okay. You know, I go on a roll with these things.
I'm looking at the clock and be like, okay, this is answer number 1. Here we go. No.
Yes.
No, you know, that analogy.
Can you see that in your mind, the way I kind of described that? Yeah.
I can. Yeah. And I've never heard it described like that before. It's really interesting because obviously we're talking about steam is a different phase of water, right? So it is water. Correct. It's just in a different style of mode, whatever the word is.
Yes.
I'm looking for there. Yes. And yet, you know, it is functioning in many of the same ways, especially when you're talking about how it condenses and then it's actually turning back into water at that point.
Correct. To re-evaporate.
It's that condensate. Liquid water. Yeah, exactly right. And so the idea is, I'm sure we'll touch on wet packs here in a moment too, but I know like you kind of reference, hey, we're doing the loading portion of this to do a number of things. It's not just to keep from getting wet packs. It's to allow effective sterilization in the cycle to begin with.
Contact on surfaces, correct. Right?
Yeah.
You're right on target. Yeah.
You know, something else though that you posted about recently, and I want to bring it up before I forget about it, but it was a graphic of one of those trays that I think you used the phrase like superheat condenser or whatever, like it was a Charnley hip retractor, maybe.
Oh, correct. A heat sink. Talking about a heat sink.
Yeah. Can you line out like what that is and why that's important, even maybe in this context for loading
and
too?
This is in the AAMI documents. They use a reference or a term called heat sinks. And the picture that Hank is referring to was, imagine a piece of stainless steel like the size of essentially a soda can, right? Or for you in the Midwest, a pop can, right? So that's a big metal mass. Now, it doesn't have to be that. It could be all my Richardson retractors tucked in the corner of a tray. That's metal mass. If you think of the steam coming in and contacting that and collapsing into that condensate or liquid water, AAMI also has the 25-pound rule, right? It's 25 pounds a tray with the container. But that doesn't mean we can put 18 pounds in one little corner. We have to distribute our metal mass so that we don't essentially, in real layman's terms, create these puddles of water is an even easier way of naming condensate. That's what I was talking about. And then post-sterilization, that metal mass will stay hot for a very long time. And a lot of us now are using temperature guns, which is great, but maybe we're just putting the red laser dot on the face of that tray and not underneath the tray where that metal mass is, because that might still show it's 120 or 130 degrees. And that's, one of many causes of wet packs or moisture in a set would be taking something warm and putting it onto a colder surface can create that condensation outside of the sterilizer. which would be
so
wet pack.
to your point, I guess the source of the wet packs can be happening in the cycle itself.
Correct.
If it's not loaded properly, or to your other point, unloading could have its own implications around.
Listen, I don't want to take work away from myself, but many times I go into a hospital that's having wet pack problems, and I walk in and I look at the sterilizer, and there's a big rack next to it, and I say, "What's that rack?" And they say, "That's our cool down rack." And I say, "There's your wet pack problem. Send the check to David Jagrosse Consulting." But yeah, that is a big source. Or look, Hank, the OR pressures us. You've seen it. Let me get the cart and I'll put blankets all over it. And there's all these little off-label techniques because the OR puts us under demand. And I'm glad this came up. They want the trays right away. But here's how SPD sabotages itself often. We tell our customer it's going to be ready at 1 p.m. because that's when the cycle's over, right? And of course, the OR's calling at 12:58, 12:59. We're not telling you have to add cool down time when you're telling the customer when the item's going to be ready, right? Because if you say 1 o'clock and that door opens, they want it at 1. You can't then tell the customer, I really meant 1:30 or 2 o'clock, right? Mm-hmm. So there's another little gem there.
That's a fantastic point. And, if that information is not posted in your department or at least trained for your technicians, right? That should be very, very obvious that anytime you're talking about delivery times.
Correct. Almost a whole other topic.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It really is. Going back to the strategy around loading, you lined out a lot of the key points, right?
Like that waterfall analogy.
Yeah. Got the waterfall, the reason that we want our trays below wrapped items, not on top wrapped items. Those are some of the basics there. What would you say, going back to the amount of metal mass here?
Great points of discussion. Yep.
How are you teaching or educating around, hey, we got a lot of loaner trays that we're trying to sterilize at the same time, and we got to get these babies through. I could fit X amount of trays in my sterilization rack.
Sure.
Is that something that is best practice? Is good practice? How do we navigate that?
I'm so glad you hit on it, Hank, because here is the deal. The autoclave has an IFU, and in that IFU, it will tell you exactly it may not use the term metal mass, but it will tell you how many trays you can load in one cycle. That is all based on a scientific fact that based on the chamber size, and I always use this analogy because it's really easy, but let's just say 400 pounds is the limit on this sterilizer. So you put 400 pounds inside that sterilizer. Let's say, for the sake of education, that generates a 1 liter bottle of water, right, of condensate. They know scientifically that autoclave is capable of re-evaporating that 1 liter of water. The minute you go over 405 pounds, the autoclave is not forgiving. It doesn't care if you had a good day, a bad day. That is going to be carryover. That liquid condensate, 1 liter and 1 ounce, that 1 ounce is going somewhere. It's going to be hidden in a pack. Maybe you'll be lucky enough you'll see it on the lid. You ever see that sometimes? You open it up and you see visible moisture. But more often than not, it's inside the trays. And then the OR calls us and says, we have a wet pack issue. So your autoclave ultimately has a limit on the amount of metal mass. And I see quite often, you can do it manually. You need to weigh your trays and you need to know your set weights. It's a little harder, but manually you can know your set weights, and whoever's loading the sterilizer kind of has a calculator going in their head. But even better is to load all that in your tracking system. And as you're scanning sets to the load, it's doing the math behind the scenes. Most major tracking systems have that capability. You have to talk to your manufacturer or your representative about it.
Are you seeing a lot of departments out there today actually utilizing that tool, right? Because
Yes.
this is not new information about the IFU. Like, it's been out there for a while, but you are starting to see folks.
And to your point, Hank, I can fit. There's a space and we're all under demand. There's an open space for one more set. But when I try to scan it, the tracking system beeps and says, no, you can't. We're at our weight limit,
Right. There's some assumptions even in that weight limit, right? It's assuming like a certain amount of steam access, right? Like that the utilities are running the way they should.
Correct.
So
you're at the right steam, like 90.
It's all efficient. Yeah,
97%. Like
it's like all things created equal. Yeah. Yes, you can run 400 pounds, but correct. If you're not getting good quality steam, if you're not getting all the steam that you should be getting, you could still be compliant with your sterilizer weight and then still be experiencing the exact same issues. To your point, because the science is unforgiving, and you're not necessarily going to know that on the front end.
Hank, as you know, the loaner trays, they're poly liners on a rubber finger mat. Metal will retain BTUs and heat, and then a nice stainless steel set inside a nice aluminum container is going to evaporate that liquid water much more effectively. Now throw in a 3-layer loaner tray with poly inserts on rubber finger mats. It simply doesn't hold the heat well. So be aware of that, especially if they come out of the washer already wet and they're not being dried. You're putting liquid water into the cycle. But another analogy I want you to think about is those rigid containers. In the U.S., we do mixed loads. We put peel pouches on, we do blue wrap, and we put containers. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I want people to think of those rigid containers as almost like a little electric heaters. They heat up. If it's a stainless steel set in an aluminum container, they radiate heat even inside that cycle. So if I have that difficult to dry set, I would essentially almost try to surround it, not above it, but maybe to the right and left and underneath it, put my rigid containers around it to help radiate that heat. A lot of us have, issues where we want things a certain way. I'm going to put all my containers on the left. I'm going to put all my blue wrap on the right. I don't want to use any derogatory terms but some of us might be fickle like that and want to arrange things a certain way. But there is science behind the way we're arranging the load, I think is the great way to say it.
So, Dave, we may come back to some of the science piece here in a second, but I want to switch gears and ask you just on the workflow and efficiency side of this. So, we'll take a step back. The load's not in the autoclave yet. We're getting the items onto the sterilization cart itself. What are your thoughts, or what's been your experience, or what do you recommend around the best, most efficient, maybe even safest way to load the cart itself with trays and instruments? Are you seeing best practice, like most efficient practice, to have one person doing that and they're assigned like the sterilizer, the cooker for the night? Are you seeing teams that kind of load, like everyone's loading the cart and it's kind of a team effort? But what are the pros and cons, and what's your recommendation to keep that like correct
and consistent
and efficient and consistent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's key. And Hank, I think you've seen it too. It's really based on size. In a smaller facility, 3 or 4 of you, you're kind of doing all your own stuff. You might come out of decontam and assemble your own tray and put it in the sterilizer, right? But in the larger or mid-size facilities, I do more often than not see it as an assignment, a separate assignment. You are on sterilization this evening. And more often than not, we're talking about steam, but they would also cover low temp. And sometimes I'll even see some put away incorporated with that, because when the cycles are cool enough to be put away, room temperature, refer to Amy, you need those carriages back. You need the carriages to put in the autoclave. So sometimes I'll see that combined, but that is a great way for efficiency and consistency if you have the manpower and the staffing to do that.
Right. I don't want to get us completely off track, but one complicating factor in our loads, you mentioned in the U.S. we do mixed loads in terms of the style of packaging, but we also do mixed loads. I guess we can do mixed loads in terms of implants or non-implants. And, back in the day, maybe that was more of a challenge around the workflow because of how we were running biological indicators in many places, but not all places. So what are your thoughts on that implication in terms of loading and in terms of efficiency, again, in driving compliance and quality? If you're running every load, do you need to do it different than if you're not doing every load monitoring?
Sure. I've seen a gamut. I've seen a gamut of things. The AMI document advises us to do weekly, preferably daily, but they don't take that preferably lightly. And with every implant load, I've seen everything from going into facilities that strictly do daily, and then and with implants. And then I've seen some facilities that will do a noon test and then a 6 p.m. test. They kind of break the day
Really?
up.
I've never seen that.
And the reason for this, folks, just for the newbies maybe out there and for refresher, is that the guidance tells us, and the IFUs of the biologicals tell us, if we get a positive readout, a failure, that we have to recall, we have to pull every device back to the last known negative test. So one element, Hank, that I'll introduce that you just said is the legal. Now we start getting into standards, best practices, guidelines, and then the legal realm. So I call this your window of liability. If I'm doing daily testing on autoclave 1 and I have no implants, let's say for average I did 10 cycles that day. Monday, right? I come in Tuesday morning, I run my daily, it goes positive. I now have to go and pull all 10 loads back to the last known negative. So not many of us put that stuff on the shelf. It's most likely going to be used on patients. So that is what I describe as the window of liability. You start lowering that window the more frequently you do biological testing from a legal standpoint. Because let's just say on Monday, there was a BI run on load 5. Now I'm only recalling 5 loads. Now I'm only potentially notifying 5 patients or more. So ideally, when you do run those BIs on every load, you are closing and shutting that window of liability because, as you know, the technology has changed. And I don't know if the cat's out of the bag, but there's instant BIs coming out. I mean, I go back to the 48-hour days. So we used to wait 2 days and we would get a positive BI and we had to recall 2 days of product. So imagine that. But the technology has changed, and usually the BI is read before the load is cooled down. So you shouldn't be releasing it's almost like a built-in quarantine because the BI is being read. Now, I'm on a roll. Let me roll here.
Go ahead.
The BIs, what I often see is we have this rapid technology and people take the test out of the load and it sits on the counter for an hour. Get the test into the incubator, folks. We need it read, because we're not going to release the goods until they're room temperature, according to Amy. We want to get those tests in the incubator right away. Yeah,
that's funny. All that innovation and all that money to get the rapid test.
Right down the pot. We're back to 3-hour readout. Yeah.
That's
like, what the heck?
So, Dave, you mentioned in one of your earlier answers, the soaker sheets. I don't know if you said soaker sheets or not.
Yeah, I implied them. Yep, to spread the surface area of the water or condensate.
Yeah, right. So is that standard practice? Is it just common practice? Is there a reason maybe that certain people wouldn't want to do that? And then even beyond that, are there other kind of accessories to sterilization loads that you've got opinions on or that you want to kind of give nuance around that folks should be thinking about here?
Thank you. I feel like you're throwing me softballs here because
these are real questions. So.
It's not hard to get me excited about anything, right? But but you are absolutely right. And in the old days, like in this business 5 years ago, but in the old days, we would put towels and everything. So let's talk, we will reiterate. The purpose is to spread the surface area. Think of a bead of water and how much heat I have to put into that bead of water to boil it and evaporate it off, versus if I take that bead of water and I spread it over the whole size of a soaker sheet, right? It's going to evaporate much quicker. So whether it's a cotton towel or whether it's a soaker sheet, we're moving away from towels because we know that lint fibers are just as dangerous to our patients as any other thing. It's a foreign body reaction, and I think people struggle with that. There's bioburden, but then there are foreign bodies. Like when I work with a lot of our industry partners, I explain to their scientists and R&D folks that, like I can take a pebble of sand and I could theoretically clean it and I could sterilize it, but it doesn't belong in somebody's body, right? Like your body is going to react to that with pyrogens or whatever. So we don't want lint fibers in there, okay? I see them all over the assembly tables because our tables are bright. People like to lay them out. I say two things. There are companies that sell table mats, which are really cool. And if your sets are that wet that you got to put towels or things on the table, maybe it's time to look at your dry times on your washers, because we shouldn't have wet sets all laying around in the assembly area because that's not good either.
Right. Yeah, man, you're pulling us back into the washers now, too. We've talked BIs. It's connected.
You better cut me off, man.
But that's the big point of this entire season, quite honestly.
Interrelated, one step after the other.
And if you get it wrong in the washer, to your point, if you got extra water, not only is it going to impact your assembly,
correct.
If you're wrapping that wet tray, then it's going to impact the sterilization cycle as well.
I like it, Hank. It's a great theme. I like to always reference new technicians and senior technicians to say what we do is manufacturing, and in some areas it's very specific. So you might not realize it's a big deal right now on assembly, but then, when I'm manufacturing parts for outer space, the rocket might fail because of one little dimension that was off, one little specification that was off, right? Could have a huge impact.
So, Dave, a second ago, you mentioned low temp, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but is there anything else conceptually that folks should be thinking about loading or, prepping their loads for low temperature sterilization that you haven't already covered on this steam conversation?
Yeah. I mean, it's, we can't deal with anything cellulose, and moisture is really our, not our friend in that area, and really making sure that we're adhering to the different cycle types, right? I think a lot of people sometimes also overlook the weight limits because the machine may not, if you're right on the threshold of a weight limit of a cycle on low temp, it might let it go through, but you could be compromising sterility there. We want to make sure that we're using the right cycle for the right medical devices and that we know what the weight requirements are for each of those cycles.
And you're referencing the weight requirements because unlike steam, which is sending the same amount of steam through every single cycle in these low temp, many of these machines, they're weighing your load and saying, okay, 25 kilograms, this is how much sterilant we're delivering. So if that's off, then we got a problem.
It's very precise and low temperature. You're getting one cartridge. Steam, to your point, Hank, and I was going to bring this up earlier, I go back to the days where we did linen packs. Linen packs would absorb tons of steam. The packs would actually be heavier when they came out of the cycle, but the autoclave will keep feeding it steam till it gets to its set point, whereas there isn't an unlimited amount of sterilant. It's dosed in those machines.
Okay. Well, I know we could talk for another couple hours on this topic, right, Dave, but
thank you, buddy.
I'm carving out time from your conference up there in Canada. So yeah, thank you for sitting in with us today and giving us some good analogies, some good food for thought, and then hopefully, introducing you to some of those new technicians out there tuning in to Beyond Clean. Maybe this is the first time they heard of you before, and I want to encourage anybody to reach out to Dave if you have more questions. We'll have his contact information in the show notes so you can reach out. And yeah, brother, keep doing the good work out there. Really appreciate you.
They may not know who I am, but they certainly hear me all the way down the hallway here. Thank you, though. Thanks for the opportunity, buddy. It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, take care.
All right, that was Dave Jagrosse. You're listening to Beyond Clean, and I want to remind everybody out there, if you're not already subscribed to Beyond Clean on your favorite social media network, go ahead and do that right now. Give us a like, a follow, and or a share on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can listen to us anywhere podcasts are found. Make sure and check us out on the Beyond Clean mobile app. And until we talk to you again next week, keep fighting dirt.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.